worried about tomorrow, when I've worried about the past, but I'm living for the moment, cause it's all I call that's mine, and I'm happy most of the time. I have lived a life of virtue, and I've lived a life of blame. Never meant to hurt you, but I've hurt you just the same. But I'm finally forgiven and acquitted of my crime, and I'm happy most of the time. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Don't you let your thinking fool you. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Won't you open up your mind? Glory, 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 glory. And the problem's been destroyed. And I'm happy most of the time. Well, I've thrown away my Prozac and my reefer and my tea. I never want to go back to the man I used to be. And I'm walking in spirit even when the sun don't shine. And I'm happy most of the time. Well, I'm happy most of the time. Well, I'm happy most of the time.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're so happy to have you with us, Tommy Santoriello and Margaret Lassen. We're so happy to have you with us. And you may recognize them from our Walking with Whitman program. We miss having them in person, but we're so happy to have you this way. So thank you. And we'll be hearing more from them at the end of our program. We'll have a longer set. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's so wonderful to have you here, all of our donors. Today we have another interesting weather development as we did the first time we scheduled this. We do have a tornado warning in effect here on Long Island, but the show must go on. So we are doing everything we can to still have this event. If we do lose connection, hopefully not, we will of course reschedule it again, and we'll be emailing you links if that happens. Let's just hope everything goes as smoothly as it should. And I'm going to remind everyone to just please keep your microphones muted so that we can hear all of our wonderful speakers tonight. But we will be having applause at certain times. So for that, you can unmute for a moment and then remember to remute after the applause. All right. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy this is happening. So tonight we will be featuring special thanks from Walt Whitman Birthplace Association Executive Director Cynthia Shore. Trustee and donor Jeffrey Gould will offer a welcome on behalf of the board. Then we will explore selected archival items with Walt Whitman Birthplace Association Assistant Curator and Historian Margaret Gardy. And to conclude, we'll have Tommy Santoriello and Margaret Lassen perform for us again. And everyone is welcome to type all of their questions or comments in the chat, and we'll be looking at that during the program. And if you have any questions for Margaret, you can also type them in there and we'll make sure that she sees those. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Walt Whitman Birthplace Association Executive Director, Cynthia Shore. Cynthia, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. And we'll do a sound check. My sound is good, Caitlin? Great. Well, we need, when we're doing our applause, thank you to all of you donors, but we're certainly going to say thank you to Caitlin, how she manages this under the utmost pressure of storms and internet and connections. She does a great job, and she's doing a terrific job for us. So thank you, Caitlin. And tonight is a night of thank yous. We're here tonight, board members and myself, to say thank you to all you wonderful donors, you historic-minded people who found something in your attic, who saw something in grandpa's chest, or who something that's been in the family for many, many years, and you have decided what is the best thing to do with this. And I get these calls over the transom and through the lines, and it thrills me when I receive these calls from people like you who want to do the right thing. You want to put your precious historic artifact in a place that it will be viewed and studied and part of a collection and part of research. And you certainly have come to the right place, certainly with your Walt Whitman artifacts. So I thank you very much, all of you who are here in the audience today. I'm going to mention you all one by one in a few minutes. But first I want to also introduce our board members who are here, our board members who are stewards of the Walt Whitman birthplace and who give their time and energy and money and fundraising to make it all that we are today. So I will say thank you. I don't know if you can see them all when the screen comes, but we have Vice President Susan Fishbein is here. Hi, Susan. We have Secretary Maria Basil is with us. And we have Joanne Rea, Richard Bronson, and Harriet Spitzer. So I know I speak for them, and I know board member Jeffrey Gould is going to be speaking for them in just a moment. So this is the board who gives me direction and guidance and leadership and makes sure that we are doing the best that we can for you and for the community. I want to say thank you to all of you for pivoting. That's my new word now, pivot, pivot, pivot. From our last donor date that we were rained out, and as Caitlin said, there is a hurricane warning as we speak. So right now my sun is shining, and hopefully it will continue in the next hour, hour and a half that we're going to have our program. I would say thank you to Margaret and Tom again for your music. We look forward to having you back. And as Caitlin said, our curator, our assistant curator and historian, Margaret, will be with us shortly to talk about all the artifacts. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce board member Jeffrey Gould, who's been on the board, I think as long as I have now, many, many years, over 10 years, also offering guidance and leadership. And Jeffrey, would you like to say a few words? Jeffrey was one of our major supporters and donors of the Gould Feinstein Library collection that we acquired in 2014. So Jeffrey, please join us and say a few words.
Thank you, Cynthia, and good evening. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Walt Whitman Birthplace Association, we welcome you. And I want to thank you, Cynthia, and all of your colleagues for all that you do to further the mission. We do live in very interesting times, and I know that the birthplace is doing what it can to share its beautiful things with the public. Just a few words. Expression. Our republic is based on expression, and literacy is a very vital way to accomplish this. It's our American right to express ourselves. Walt Whitman, as you all know, was a true example of that which we cherish the most, the freedom to express ourselves. Many of us have our favorite Whitman prose, our favorite Whitman stories from history. My family was in the printing and publishing business, and we were blessed to be able to sell that business to LexisNexis several years ago. The values that we learned growing up were literacy and expression, and to publish. Walt, of course, was a printer, among everything, a writer, a publisher. So I personally have some synergies with that example of expression. I was honored to be able to help acquire a magnificent collection of works relating to Walt Whitman and works by Walt Whitman. And this is the library that we have bestowed to the birthplace in honor of my parents, my late father, Norman Gould, who passed October 1st in 2018 at the age of 91, and my mom, who's still rocking and rolling at 92 years old in Florida. On behalf of the Gould family, we will continue our mission of literacy from generation to generation in the spirit of all of that Walt Whitman wrote. And I thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. Yes, I see Susan is clapping. We can all clap if we want to on our mute buttons. Very eloquent and certainly very supportive. And you raised a very good point about Walt certainly being a writer and free expression and expressing himself in ways that weren't necessarily, common in those days, very uncommon, we might say. And we are very lucky to be the preservers and the promoters of his legacy here at the birthplace. I have to say that it has been my pleasure to have been able to meet you all personally. And it's very nice that the board members who are here tonight will be able to get to meet you just like I have. I've spoken to you, of course, in that wonderful outreach phone call. And then we make appointments to meet, whether it's on the road in Maryland or whether it's in California or Washington, D.C., wherever our travels connect us. So it has certainly been a journey of discovery for me, meeting all of you wonderful, historic-minded people who, as I said, are doing the right thing by history. And I'm going to welcome everyone by name, and not in no particular order. And then I will have Margaret start her presentation. Well, we will certainly clap for all of you. Along with Jeffrey Gould's library donation, the library actually was a product of Miriam Feinstein and her husband. And we have Miriam and Alan here today. Miriam is his wife and Alan is the son. And it was that collection that he was a collector, and he specialized in Walt Whitman. So Miriam called me and said, what am I going to do with all these books? I want to do something wonderful. And something wonderful happened. So between her and Jeffrey Gould, they made it happen. And we inherited over 350 volumes, I believe. And it makes us second only to the Library of Congress. So I've been saying that. I haven't been corrected yet, but I like to brag about that. So welcome, Miriam and Alan. I also would like to welcome Jay Smith, someone I met years ago. And he said, my grandfather belonged to the Whitman Society, and we have these wonderful artifacts. And again, it was such a pleasure going through the artifacts and speaking with him. And I know his family, LaCaine, I think he's here with us tonight, and his sister also made a family decision to donate those wonderful artifacts. And thank you very much. And those artifacts will be shown later on. I want to say welcome and thank you to Robert Schultz, who was at our international conference in August, and Marcia Manns, who called and said she had a plaque of the birthplace, Jenny Lingelbach, who called and has a portrait of Walt Whitman, and we met by the side of the road in Maryland a few months ago, very exciting. And Marilyn Rodriguez, thank you. Her father was a musician and a professor, and he had a collection of musical scores that she called and said, would we like them? And I said, certainly. And I went and met Marilyn up in Connecticut also last month. It's wonderful. In spite of the pandemic, I think even though we've been self-isolating, I feel like I'm even more connected than ever with all these wonderful things going on through Walt Whitman. So thank you, Marilyn, and welcome. George Mollis, he is our resident photographer. And he has been donating for many years now, and he played a large role in the pictures that are in the renovated artifact exhibit in our interpretive center. So thank you, George, and welcome. And Margaret, of course, is our curator. She's also had donations. Thank you, Margaret, for your time and attention. I want to thank Rebecca Mills. Met her, I think, in Washington, D.C. I hope you're with us tonight. Richard Ryan, our curator, who through his years of collecting Whitman artifacts and has been donating them to us also. Dr. Jerome Loving was at our birthday celebration and donated a book. I don't know if he's making it here tonight. And certainly Natalie Swertweger, who's not with us because she's not on the internet, but her daughter, Sharon Wilson, should be joining us. Her other daughter, Sandy, may be joining us, and Sharon's son, Daniel, should be with us. So thank you to all of you. They donated the Whitman Bible, and that's a very special item we'll be looking at. Okay, now we have other friends who are here tonight. I want to say hello to Ed Centeno. He had an exhibit. He specializes in Whitman and commercial items. And thank you, Ed, for your exhibit and your time, and welcome tonight for being here. I also want to say thank you to Mark Cortad, who is here. He's the director of the Huntington Arts Council, and he supports our events with wonderful NISCA grants and support. So thank you, Mark, for coming and being here. Robert Hughes, the town historian. We attended lunches together as directors, and has given me much good advice about our collection and all things library and historic. So welcome, Robert. And we have members, Mary Flatley and Al Walker, who donate their time and energy. Al donates a poinsettia and flowers every Christmas, holidays, and brings over spring bouquets for our spring. And Mary also has donated her time and bought a branch and bricks. And certainly we need all of you here. A very special thank you to Suki Walter. Suki is the widow of our board president, Dr. William Walter, whom we lost in April of this year. And so Suki is joining us in her own behalf, and certainly as a representative of her husband, William, who has dedicated over 40 years to the association, I think on another 10 as president, and his contributions are so many, they would take page after page, not only in his time and attention, but in his writings and his historic research, his contribution to book chapters, his overseeing the renovation of the exhibit, his contributions to making that happen in so many ways with the blueprint as an engineer and as a donor. So Suki, certainly we all miss William, and Bill as we fondly called him. And thank you so much for sharing him. I know he was at our place many an hour, and so I know you knew where he was, and we appreciate that you were generous and he was generous. So welcome, Suki. So nice to have you here too. Now that is all that I've had the update for. If there have been other people who've jumped on, maybe later Caitlin can say hello and we can announce them also. So right now, having mentioned you all by name, let's all have a round of applause, unmute yourselves, and let's hear it for all of our wonderful supporters and donors. Yay! All right, I'm going to turn this over to, I believe, let me get my notes here, to Nick and Iris and Margaret. I want to say thank you to Nicholas Siskey and Iris, who are in the backgrounds there in masks. You may or may not see them as Margaret's doing her presentation, but they've been there all day and getting ready. And so thank you for your back-end support, back office support, Nick and Iris. Okay, so I think we're down to the program. I'm going to introduce Margaret, and she is going to start her display and a discussion of the artifacts. She'll spend a couple minutes with each artifact, so don't get alarmed. You'll see a lot on the table, but she'll keep it moving, and she has such interesting stories. I mean, I wish we could go on all night long. She could go on all night long, but she has selected key things to say and share with you. So thank you again. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts on behalf of the board, on behalf of the Whitman Association, and also on behalf of New York State, Suffolk County, town of Huntington, all of our wonderful elected officials who give us support, and all of the community certainly who gives us support, both locally and globally. Tonight's event is a closed event, but I know with Zoom, we've been able to have participants, and Caitlin is shaking her head, from around the world. And so if there's one, you know, silver lining in all of this, it's that we've really connected with our Bolton group and again, with artists and poets from around the world. So that's very exciting. And again, many of you are here tonight because you're not certainly in Long Island, but you are where you are and joining us. So we're grateful for that. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our assistant curator. She was a tour guide, and she developed an interest in Walt Whitman's sister. And she came to me and said, do you mind if I do some research in our archives? And I said, certainly not. And she became the expert in Walt Whitman's sister, and therefore in the Walt Whitman family biography. And I dare say in many, many or all things Whitman. So we are in very good hands at the birthplace, and very good hands tonight to have Margaret Yardy display and tell us about the collection. Margaret, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Cynthia, for that lovely introduction. I thought it would be interesting tonight to start off with a brief description of what the birthplace has been collecting over the years before we get into the individual donations.
Okay.
Because it's certainly grown since the beginning of the collection. The donation started in 1951 with the transfer of ownership of the Walt Whitman birthplace to the Birthplace Association from Georgia Watson and John D. Watson, who were the last private owners. From the Watsons, we received a 19th century secretary, a two-piece desk with a fold-down writing area and a glass bookcase above. And this desk was most interesting because it has been reported that from Mrs. Watson that it was from the home of Walt Whitman's sister, Mary Elizabeth Van Nostrand, who had lived in Greenport for many years after moving there with her husband, Ansel, when they were married. And the desk was said to have been used by Walt Whitman when he visited their house. He used to visit Greenport both to see his sister and to travel between New York and his publishers at the time in Boston. Also vying for a donation number one, it was a poem by a school teacher, a high school teacher named Florence Ripley Martin. And she was a teacher at Erasmus Hall High School. And she was inspired to write a poem about Walt Whitman upon the opening of the museum. And she had it published in the newspapers, and she collected a donation of $25.40 from her pupils, and that was one of the first donations to the birthplace. Well, certainly the collection has grown a lot since then. Today, we have collection in many different categories. First, there's a library, and at the last count, we had 1,361 books, periodicals, and pamphlets, including most of Walt's revisions of Leaves of Grass that were published in his lifetime. We have a music collection. We have recordings on 33 and 78 RPM records, if you remember them. And we have cassette tapes. They were transferred to, thanks to our music historian, George Malice. And we have musical scores of compositions that were printed, they're actually music. Some of them just works inspired by Walt's poetry and the themes in Walt's poetry. And we also have musical scores that include Walt Whitman's text, his writing, his poetry, his verse. So there's different categories of composers, and different types of music were written when the composers were inspired by Walt's writings. We have archive files. We have over 500 numbered files, and they are growing. They contain the correspondence and records of the founders and trustees of the birthplace from as early as the 1940s and a few even earlier. And they include information about the building of the Interpretive Center in 1997 and the restoration of the birthplace house in 2000. There are also scrapbooks that contain everything from newspapers to letters to photographs. We have maps and documents, some original dating back to the 18th century and extending to the present day. They're very helpful because most of those maps include the names of property owners, which is very useful when you're doing genealogy or trying to figure out the history of a building. We have works of art and framed items. We have illustrations, woodcuts, prints, etchings, and they're by professional and amateur artists. And they depict images of Walt Whitman and of the birthplace house. We have photographs, many photographs original. They are of the Walt Whitman and the birthplace house, and also places on Long Island, events at the birthplace, and much, much more. We have artifacts and decorative objects. The artifacts consist of furniture, pottery, baskets, tools, kitchenware, bedding, and they're all circa the time of the Whitman occupation, which we believe was from 1816 to 1823, the early federal period. And they're placed in the house to interpret it for visitors. There are 27 furnishings in the house on loan from New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. We have other items not necessarily related to the house, but related to Whitman, such as the old red clay, salt glazed field jug or whiskey jug that belonged to Walt Whitman's father, that Walt used to drink from when he visited the Stafford farm in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, in New Jersey. Walt used to stay with the Stafford family, and he used to go to a place called Timber Creek in order to bathe, relax, and try to restore his health after he had his stroke in 1873. So today I'll be presenting a selection of items that we either individually donated or were part of a group of items that were donated to the museum in most recent years. They were chosen at random, and they do not necessarily represent the most valuable or rare items in any donation. I hope you enjoy seeing them and learning a little bit about why they're interesting to Whitman scholars. Because of time constraints, as Cynthia mentioned, we will be spending only a few minutes on each item. But if you would like to offer any comments, additional information about the item, or have questions, by all means, feel free to enter your questions in the chat. Before I begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Ella Shahigian and Christine Kelsch. They were two summer interns who helped me choose and prepare some of the items that we're going to view. And my personal thanks to all of you donors who recognize the importance of your donation to the understanding of Walt Whitman's life and his writing. Thank you. I'm going to move over to the next spot, okay, and we're going to talk about the first donation. And I'm going to take my notes with me because it's much easier to have them. I don't like to mess up the statistics. So the first collection items are from the collection of the Norman and Jeanette Gould Library from their donation of the Feinstein Whitman book collection. And I have a selection of books that will show you the wide range of books in the collection, and they're exciting to scholars. Walt Whitman was so popular, and there were so many books and variations of text of every book that Walt Whitman wrote, and even the books written about Walt Whitman, that for a scholar to have a specific book is very important when they're doing their research. So this is a big contribution to knowledge about Walt Whitman. I guess you couldn't help but notice the library I was standing in front of earlier, and a large portion of that library, about 2.5 cases, it contains the over 250 books from the Feinstein Gould collection. Now the donation was received in April of 2018. And it was given in honor of his parents, Norman and Jeanette Gould. When Mr. Gould heard of the significance of the Marvin Feinstein's large collection of books by and about women, he generously secured it for the birthplace. Marvin Feinstein was a lifelong Northport book collector and bookseller, and the collection was offered to the birthplace, as Cynthia mentioned, by his widow and sons. So let's look at some selections from the library. The first thing I'd like to show is a copy of the Thayer and Eldridge edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. This is actually the third revision of Walt Whitman's famous book of shocking poetry. And in just before 1860, in the late 1850s, Walt was looking to find a publisher for Leaves of Grass because he had failed to find a publisher in New York for his planned third edition. He had added about 146 new poems to the collection of the original 36, and Thayer and Eldridge sent him a letter, to his great surprise, asking if they could produce Leaves of Grass for him. The book is actually beautiful. It's a well-illustrated and well-printed copy that was produced with 3 different colored covers. I think they were gold, brown, orange, brown, and green, if I remember correctly. And there's a photograph based on a portrait by Charles Hine of Walt Whitman. Hine was one of Walt Whitman's friends. And the title page has beautiful script, and you can see all the squiggles and curls, and it's a very elegant book, a very nice, convenient size that you could carry with you. Walt was very much pleased with this. I'm going to turn the page so you can see some of the illustrations in the book. Walt reorganized his poems for this edition of Leaves of Grass, and the illustrations, in other words, putting the poems for the first time into clusters, because one of the complaints about the first 2 editions was that the poetry wasn't well organized. So he did try to organize poems in clusters. And what I'd like you to focus in on is that punctuating the verse in the book are these lovely small illustrations. You have a butterfly, and on other pages there are different motifs from a view of the globe to sunrises that make this a very pleasant and lovely book to have in your hand. So this is an important copy of Leaves of Grass, and we're thrilled to have it. I'm going to close the book now, and we'll move on to the next. Now, the second book is in a slipcase. It is The Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Yes, another edition of Leaves of Grass. We have I'd say about 5 shelves of them if you combine all the libraries. And this is in a lovely slipcase, and it's a slightly more interesting than average copy of The Leaves of Grass, because if you look at the title page, there's a nice paste-on illustration or drawing representing some of the poetry, the verse in the book. It was illustrated for the Modern Library, and the illustrator was a fellow named Boardman Robinson. Boardman Robinson was a political cartoonist, a painter, and an illustrator. He was born in Nova Scotia, and he supported himself in art school in Massachusetts by running an elevator. A typical student job, if I've ever heard one. He intended to be a sculptor, but his first attempt at making a large sculpture left him bankrupt. So he changed his plans and went into illustration. Robinson worked on various projects after he came to New York, and he achieved some success. In 1903, as when he arrived in New York. His works included murals in Washington, D.C., in several buildings, and his art has been exhibited in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney, San Francisco, and in Denver, Colorado. He died in 1952 at age 76. And what's very nice about many of the donations we receive is that they dovetail with other donations. Behind me is an illustration of Walt Whitman that was drawn by Robinson, and we already had it in the collection at the time we received his book. So this nicely dovetails with an item we already have. Now, the next item is a large book, and it's part of a set of 10 books. Okay, the book that I'm showing you, the book that I'm showing you is part of a set of 10 books that were beautifully executed and printed, and it is the complete writings of Walt Whitman, issued under the editorial supervision of his executors. And the executors were Morris Buck, Thomas Harned, and Horace Traubel. And it has additional biographical and critical information, and it was prepared by Oscar Lavelle Triggs, PhD. It was produced by G. Putnam Sons in London, in New York and London, for the Knickerbocker Press. And this is copy number 133 of 300. And it was produced in 1902 after Walt's death. The book is absolutely beautifully illustrated in red and black ink. And I'll show you the title page so you can see that. So sometimes a little hard to turn the pages. And it's in a lovely style. And what I find most interesting about this book, or this set of books, is that every set of books had pasted in facsimiles of Whitman's letters, manuscripts, and other writings. And this was wonderful in the day when it was much harder to travel. So this way the armchair scholar, the wealthy armchair scholar, I might add, would be able to have a sample of their favorite author's writing. And it does have a beautiful image of Walt Whitman. And I'd like to show you my favorite pasting from the book. You go back to the front cover. I'm going to support this. So we have a sort of transparent onion skin type of paper pasted into the front cover. And it has writing that definitely appears to be Walt Whitman's writing. However, this is a facsimile, and it has a note on top. It says, from WW, and it was intended for the book, meaning the book, the biography of Walt Whitman that Richard Morris Buck was in the process of writing to describe Walt Whitman. What I think is so funny about that is that Walt has lifted some pages or passages from Specimen Days to give to Buck to make sure that Buck gets it right. And since Walt was a little bit perhaps lazy about it, he didn't finish off with more passages from the book. He just pasted a piece on the bottom to finish it off. He was very thrifty that way. Now, Buck had visited the birthplace with Walt, and he had been inspired by Walt after meeting him in 1879 in Camden, New Jersey. What's fun about this to me is that when you turn over the facsimile paper, lo and behold, you have Walt Whitman's New Jersey Railroad Company free pass for the year of 1881. And it's signed by Walt Whitman and issued by the president, the vice president of the railroad, W.J. Sewell. So you can see Walt was living large in Camden. Okay, I'm going to put this book away now. And we're coming to some other books, so we just remove these out of the way. The next book, next thing we're going to talk about in the collection is that we have some interesting, a number of interesting books in foreign languages. And this definitely presents a challenge for a librarian that doesn't speak a foreign language. However, we were able to look up some of these books on the internet, and we have some information about them. The first book I'd like to show you is a book called Walt Whitman Grashalmen, which I understand, according to Google Translation, means blades of grass or leaves of grass. And this was issued in 1917 in Amsterdam, and it's the first Netherlands edition of Leaves of Grass with a text in Dutch. There's a similar text, Grashalm, which is, I believe, a German version. And it has a nice, the Samuel Hollier etching of Walt Whitman from the first edition of Leaves of Grass in the front. And I'm always amazed at books like this because this was issued in 1917, and 1917, Europe was in World War I, and yet this book came out. The same thing goes for the next book, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the French. I can't do it. But this book is a anthology of works by Walt Whitman that was translated into French, and includes a forward by a lady named Valérie Laborde. It was published in Paris in 1918 with a Nobel Review, and the poems and prose were translated into French by Jules Laforge, Louis Fitzgerald Griffin. And you can see how comprehensive we have quite a wide range of books for scholars about Walt Whitman. Okay, I'm going to close the book there, and we're going to pass on to the next collection. Tonight is going to be an Ivorex plaque. And this is one of the most intriguing items in the collection. It is donated in 2013 by Marcia Nance, and it has its original hanging cord, you can see. And it depicts the birthplace as it looked for 1908, when we believe the last wing of the birthplace was torn down. You can see that it has 1, 2, 3 wings in the illustration. And it's a rare depiction of the birthplace house from the early 20th. Created, it was a unique product that was invented by a fellow named Arthur Osborne. He was born near Faversham, Kent, in England in 1855, the son of a bookseller whose talent led him to study art. For a brief time, he worked for the L&J Tile Company in Boston. I guess he wanted to try his hand at success in America. But he remarried and returned to England and founded his own company called the Osborne Ivorex Company. And he produced 3-dimensional decorative tiles that he thought the average working man could hang in his home for decoration. That would be something that would appeal to Walt Whitman, certainly. And he had favorite subjects for these tiles. They were usually tourist destinations. And he copied the images from postcards. Subjects he used were castles, cathedrals, the home of notable individuals, portraits of famous people, and scenes from literature. Osborne carved the master mold, and his workers painted them, giving the tiles a yellowish or a dark look to highlight the 3D relief. And to get the beautiful finish to make it look like ivory, he dipped the tiles in paraffin wax and then buffed them, which was a very interesting technique. They're very, very collectible today. Thousands were produced of certain images and very few of others. So of course the rarer images would drive the price up. I have seen copies of tiles for Dickens, other famous writers, Longfellow, as far as Americans go. Now, they are very collectible today, and I believe Marcia herself is a collector. This rare image helps us picture what the birthplace looked like before the kitchen wing was taken down, and it also illustrates Walt Whitman's influence in England and the international importance of the birthplace itself. going to pass this over, and we're going to go to our next collection. Our next collection is another collection that's very important to the birthplace, and this is the Smith collection. And I'm going to carefully remove the book from the top of this folder and turn it around so you can, we'll be talking about it last. The Walt Whitman birth from J. Madeline and LaCane Smith in 2011. The original J. Madeline and LaCane Smith's grandfather collection ranges from 1960 books by and about Whitman to historic documents, including a theater ticket for an 1880 lecture by Walt Whitman on the death of Abraham Lincoln. And I'd like to expose that now. This particular lecture, which was from a series of lectures that Walt presented sporadically, this was from a sporadic series of lectures that Walt gave about the death of Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater, and his friend Peter Doyle's information about the event, because Peter Doyle was actually present when Lincoln was assassinated. See that Walt actually signed the ticket in blue editor's pencil, which he often used. His initial W. And this lecture took place at Association Hall in Philadelphia in 1880. Okay, so you tell me what about it. Okay, it must be the storm coming through. The snowstorm. Okay. How much time has
Nick and Margaret, can you hear us?
to
We can hear you now.
Okay. I'm just wondering, Nick, maybe if you move down, the Wi-Fi might get a little better, like towards the end of the table, maybe even. Just a little, it's freezing a lot for us, and we can't always hear Margaret. Sometimes we can, but. How is the storm for you over there? Here's
Everything to be fine. Actually not even raining for us right now.
okay,
So
good.
hopefully that holds.
Okay, it might come back.
Is it storming where you are, Caitlin?
No, no,
Caitlin, is it storming there?
no, it's not yet. I just want to, I think the Wi-Fi will come back then. It might just be a momentary thing. You're totally frozen right now, though. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
I can't get. Are you done with this?
no, just
Caitlin,
Yeah, I can hear you.
perhaps we can try having Margaret display things in front of the laptop until the phone comes back.
That's a great idea, Nick. Yeah, let's try that. Great idea. Okay, I can see that. Or no, you're moving. Okay, so I'm gonna do the other camera. Where's your other camera? All right, I see your neck. We're giving a, okay. This looks much better so far, much better. Okay, we're making it work. Very good. Oh, and I'm gonna just turn off the other mic.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you, Margaret. Yes, continue, please.
Okay, I'm ready to continue. Technical difficulties here. Okay, so I'd like to continue talking about the Smith collection, which we received in 2011. It originally belonged to George J. Smith, and this impressive collection ranges from an 1880 lecture ticket on the death of Abraham Lincoln. Did everyone see that ticket? No. Okay, let me show again.
See it that well, Margaret. Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay. And it also includes a seating arrangement for the Poetry Society of America from January 28th, 1926. And it was their annual dinner. The George J. Smith was born in October 7th, 1866, was a poet, playwright, and American educator in the early 20th century. He was a member of the original Walt Whitman Fellowship, which was founded in 1894. And he was a president of the Poetry Society of America as well. He was a head of the Board of Examiners for New York City's public schools, and he was immersed in literary circles of the time, including Henry James, Jack London, and H.G. Wells. And he penned several important works himself, such as Forbidden Fruit, a stage play. And in 1898, he wrote an essay on Whitman, Radical or Conservative. And we have a copy here. And several other works on Whitman through the annual dinners. The lecture we talked about, it was Walt Whitman's presentation of the death of Abraham Lincoln for an audience at Association Hall in Philadelphia in 1880. And it was near where Walt Whitman was living at the time. He also gave lectures about Abraham Lincoln in New York City. I believe he gave about 9 lectures over a 10-year period. The seating arrangement includes novelty speakers from Edward Arlington Robinson, and it also includes, the collection includes 12 books all related to Walt Whitman, and one of them is very special. This is a small but powerful book. It's very fragile now. It has leather covers which never stand up well. And it's a Leaves of Grass with Sands at 70. Backward glance over traveled roads, and it's a very special edition with portraits from life, and it's made even more special because on the title page, printed May 31st, 1889, is an autograph by Walt Whitman in pen and ink. So this is the quality of book that we received in the Smith collection, and we have been thrilled to have it here at the birthplace. Or should I smooth here? Let's move on to the next collection. The next collection, we just received, I think this is probably our most recent collection, and it's a vast collection of musical scores that were donated by Marilyn Rodriguez earlier this year. The collection is actual music that a musician would use while he's performing the works. And with the collection came a list of 490 composers who were inspired to write music, either using Whitman's verse or inspired by the themes in his poetry. And in addition to a Whitman music collection, This addition to our Whitman music collection will probably make the Walt Whitman Birthplace one of the largest repositories of Whitman music. So what did we receive in those boxes? We're just starting to catalog the contents. We have Ned Rorum's War Scenes. He's considered one of America's premier composers of art songs. We have Paul Hindemith, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, a requiem for those we loved. It was written in 1946 and dedicated to the memory of another great fallen wartime hero, President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Hindemith was a refugee in a way. He left Germany in 1935, traveling first to Turkey and Switzerland, and then relocated in the United States by 1940. And he was a committed anti-fascist. And the Birthplace has 2 recordings of his work. They were donated by George Mallis. Next up is an elegiac ode by Charles Villiers Stanford. And this may be one of the first Whitman poems set to music. It's words from President Lincoln's burial hymn, and it was composed and published in the mid-1880s. And a performance of Stanford's Whitman settings was attended by Anne Gilchrist, and she reacted very favorably to the music. Okay, our cover unfortunately is detached. We'll move it over. We have famous composer Frederick Delius, who's represented by Seadrift. We have the conductor's score, and Delius composed this in 1992, and many consider it to be his masterpiece. It was written for a baritone soloist, mixed chorus, and a large orchestra with verse inspired by Whitman. We have Prelude and Idyll, also by Frederick Delius. And we have William Schumann, A Free Song, which is a work that won the Pulitzer Prize in 1942 to 1943. And it's also utilizing Whitman's works. Now this collection dovetails very neatly with a donation by George Mallis, our digital artist here at the Birthplace. And George has just contributed a musical performance collection of CDs, and it's also a very recent donation. They're either CDs or sets of CDs of, again, Whitman's work set to music that was inspired by Walt Whitman. Titles include Donna Novus Pastum by Vaughan Williams, The Mystic Trumpeter, The Open Road by Farrar, 10 Poems by Walt Whitman, and many, many more. And you can see a small collection of the songs that were donated here to the Birthplace. And I'm looking forward to hearing some of them. And we're also looking forward to perhaps finding a musician who would like to try out some of the compositions for the collection. Now, also donated by George is a book. And this book is in Ray Walt Whitman, and it's by David McKay, published by David McKay in 1893. It's number 595 of 1,000 issues. And this one, get this on camera, okay, and this book is inscribed by Walt Whitman's biographer, I suppose, Horace Travel. Oh, it's up this way? Okay, sure. Technical difficulties, folks. Okay, and here's the signature of Horace Travel in the book when it was produced. Another donation by George was his work on the Interpretive Center panels, which were refurbished and reimagined for the 200th birthday of Whitman. I'm going to place these on, I guess I'll place these in front of our new camera here. And what I'd like to show you is George's digital work. You have the image and then the retouched image, okay? Okay, and then the panels, and this comes from the main entrance, I believe, right? The foyer panel. And then you have the original thematic panel of the scene representing Walt's work in the hospitals in the Civil War, but it didn't show a hospital. So George found another image that more fit the text of the thematic panel. We also have thematic panel number 8, which was a new panel, and we did research for this for about a year. And we found an image of Walt Whitman's Smithtown School, the oldest image we could find of a place where Whitman taught. And George touched the picture up to make it clearer. And we also found a ticket, I don't think you can really see it, from Lafayette's visit to New York City in 1825 when he laid the cornerstone for the Apprentices' Library, and Walt Whitman was present as a young boy. And here's an image from the adjusting of the image of the Smithtown Schoolhouse. And he also was responsible for changing the portrait wall from a very confusing large number of photographs that were often very similar to each other to a lovely thematic panel with clear images of Walt Whitman at different periods of his life. Thank you, George, for all your work on that. And I did want to mention that I am not an expert on music, and thanks to George, I learned quite a bit going through the music in the CD collection about Walt Whitman being set to music. Thank you for your tutoring, George. The next item we're going to look at today is from Robert Schultz. And Robert Schultz was here at the birthplace for the Walt Whitman's 200th birthday celebration. And he donated to us 2 artistic, delicate but powerful images that will enhance the art collection here. The first is a poem and embossed with images of Walt Whitman's die-cut paper butterfly taken from the famous photograph of Walt holding the butterfly. The poem reflects on the butterfly and the fact that Walt Whitman said it was a real butterfly when it wasn't. He utilizes, to make his prints, he utilizes a special technique called an uncast chlorophyll print. And my understanding of the technique is that he takes a leaf which contains chlorophyll and uses the chemical reaction of chlorophyll with sunlight, laying an image or a photograph of, say, Walt Whitman or a Union soldier or a Confederate soldier on the leaf, and the sunlight burns the image into the leaf because the chlorophyll changes. And it creates an ephemeral but beautiful image, and it imposes Walt Whitman on leaves of grass. And this picture, made by Robert Schultz, shows that to great effect. You can see Walt's eyes and the image of the grass, and you can see Walt's face superimposed on the leaves using this special technique. And I want to mention that Robert Schultz was a presenter at the Walt Whitman International Conference in August 2019, and the author of a book, War Memoranda, incorporated images made with the chlorophyll technique. The next item we're going to see is much smaller than most of those we've seen before. And it's a stereoscopic slide, but not one of the old slides that you may have seen with a longette-like viewer. It is actually, dates from the 1940s to mid-1950s. Is that visible? Okay, good. Okay, and this stereoscopic slide has 2 images of Walt Whitman from a photograph by Matthew Brady. And on one side, it came from Patricia Brady, who I believe whose husband found it in a lucky garage sale. and it's mounted in a metal frame and labeled. On one side it says, one of the roughs are Cosmos, one of Walt's lines from Leaves of Grass. But on the other side, it's labeled published by Stereo Vistas, 19517 100th Avenue, Hollis, Queens. So we did some research to try to find the company that produced these slides, but we drew a blank. All I could find was the fact that a movie theater had this name which was next door to the business. And this was from a phone book from the 1940s. And we also turned up another collector who was looking to find out about this company, and no one has come up with anything yet. So we're still searching. The stereo slides were very popular in the 1950s, but they were bumped out of popularity when the 35 millimeter film became available. And you had to have, a camera had to have a dual lens, and the only way to view these slides properly was to have a stereo viewer to get the 3D effect. Okay, now, is it okay for seeing it here? Okay. So the next item was quite a wonderful surprise. It's a student's oil painting of Walt Whitman, and it's a very finely painted oil painting. It was not made from life, but it's still striking. The back of the painting has the artist's signature, but unfortunately, it's indecipherable. All we can be sure of is that it was painted in 1942 because the date is on the back, but the painter's last name is impossible to read. We were thinking about looking at yearbooks for the school where the owner of the painting taught, and perhaps trying to figure out who the student was. We were happy to receive it from Jenny, who was the granddaughter of a very well-known and early Whitman scholar named Scully Bradley. It was painted by a student of his, and it hung in his home. Edward Scully Bradley was a scholar, educator, and administrator at the University of Pennsylvania. He was a prolific writer, and he published biographies of literary figures, and he edited biographies of people like Mark Twain, Stephen Crane, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Walt Whitman. He was a trustee of the Walt Whitman Foundation, and checking our library, we find several works by Brady already in our collection. We have, first, we have The Fundamental Metrical Principles in Whitman's Poetry, okay, by Scully Bradley, already in the Whitman collection, in which he analyzes the meter in Walt Whitman's poetry. And we also have Walt Whitman's Backward Glances Over Traveled Roads, and there were contributory essays, and they were edited with introduction by Scully Bradley and John Stevenson. So we're very pleased to get this painting because it connects Walt Whitman with a Whitman scholar with the books in our library. It was wonderful to get it. Okay, the next item we're going to take a look at is November Boughs, and this is a book, okay, that Walt, that was donated by Rebecca Mills in 2018, and it's a leather-bound volume with maroon stamping, and it's very wonderful acquisition because, lo and behold, inside is a message from Walt Whitman in his handwriting. It says, Mrs. Leach from the author W.W. with best thanks for kindness to my dear sister, Mrs. Hyde, in sickness. November 25th, 1888. Walt Whitman's sister had married an artist named Charles Lewis Hyde in 1852, and they moved often until they settled a house on Pearl Street in Burlington, Vermont. Hyde was a moderately successful landscape painter from the Hudson River School of Painting. And when they moved to Vermont, they lived across from a lake, and he painted the views of the mountains over and over again, and had trouble selling them because the neighbors could already see the mountains from their windows, so why buy another copy? Scholar Mayor Mullins suspects that Heidi was an abusive husband and that Hannah resorted to erratic behavior as a result. And November Boughs, this inscription in November Boughs shows that Walt was thanking a neighbor woman for helping Hannah through one of her sicknesses. And in November Vows, okay, Walt sort of self-critiques himself, and he acknowledges that the working class public's lack of understanding of Leaves of Grass was a disappointment to him. This is one of the last books he published towards the end of his life. Now that dovetails with a donation. I searched for Walt Whitman all the time on the internet, seeing what comes up for sale and auction, and I was astonished to find when looking up names of Whitman's friends and relatives, a little book of poetry, Louis and Marie, Tales of the Heart, and other poems. And it was printed and written by Charles Louis Heide, Hannah's husband. He had to try poetry before he became an artist, and he was usually jealous of Walt's success as a writer, which happened in Walt's later years, of course. So that was a very wonderful find. The next book that we're going to look at is actually a tome rather than a book, and a wonderful acquisition to the birthplace. It was donated by Natalie Derenbacher Swartfager Pearson and her family. So this book is a large parlor or presentation Bible that was given to Walt Whitman in the winter of 1888-89 to his sister Mary Elizabeth. She had married Ansel Van Nostrand in 1840 and moved with him to Greenport, where he worked as a ship's carpenter. In 1850, they bought a house and lived there and raised their family. The leather cover has M.E. Van Nostrand, Mary's initials and last name, embossed in gold. And you can see it's a lovely presentation Bible that any person would be proud to have in their parlor for their neighbors to see. Now, inside are some treasures. We have inside inscription by Walt to his sister, Mrs. Mary Elizabeth Van Nostrand, from her brother, Walt Whitman. Christmas, 1878 to 1879, and it's followed by a poem that Walt, again, a big fan of pasting ins. And when you turn the page, you can see it's a large, important looking work, large print. It was printed in Philadelphia, and Walt probably bought it on his journeys from Camden to Philadelphia via the ferry in that season. Now, one interesting thing about it is that the Bible is divided into Old and New Testaments, and between the Old and New Testaments are pages for writing family history. So I'm going to gently turn the page until we reach that part of the book. And this is a process. And here's the famous page, and there's more on the reverse. Well, Walt Whitman, at the time of presenting it to his sister, wrote, and you can see this is Walt Whitman's hand, the births, marriages, and on the reverse, the deaths of family members up to that point. He lists himself, of course, and then his parents, brothers, and sisters, and other future generations of Mary's family, her children, her grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will be inscribing their names in the family Bible as well. You can see how the handwriting changes in different periods. And I think what's great is that Natalie, the donor's name, is right here on the bottom. Another interesting feature of the Bible when we received it is that enclosed in the pages of the Bible were leaves, dried leaves pressed into the pages. And there were many, many of these leaves in the pages. And this was a habit that Walt had. I was informed that books that Walt owned, they often find leaves in the pages. So we don't know if Mary did them or her family, or if these were put there by Walt. And we also have to show you the photograph, which was passed down through the family of Mary, and it was inherited by Walter Whitman Swartfager. And this is a photograph of him. and it was donated by Natalie to the birthplace in 2014, okay, on behalf of her family. The Bible had first become known to scholars through a monograph published by a Whitman researcher named Catherine Malinoff in 1941. She traveled to Greenport, Smithtown, and other places on Long Island to find any tidbits that were unpublished yet about Walt Whitman, and interviewed people who lived in those towns where Walt had stayed. And there was a photograph of the Bible in her monograph, but after that, the Bible was lost to history. And we were so thrilled, I popped out of my skin when I heard that it was being offered to the birthplace as a donation. And Cynthia went to Florida to receive the donation, and I was able to accompany her. And we had a warm welcome and a gracious and generous reception by Natalie and her family, and we forged a wonderful connection with them. A shout out to Natalie's daughter, Sharon, and her son, Daniel, who visited the birthplace last fall. Now I want to mention one other Whitman donor and collector who's here with us tonight, and his name is Ed Centeno. Ed started out, I believe, as a stamp collector, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, and he branched out into Whitman ephemera. He's amassed a huge collection of Whitman material, and in 2017, the birthplace hosted an exhibit of special items from his collection. Now, on a personal note, and here is a brochure from his event in 2017. Now, on a personal note, I can't thank Ed enough, because a few years ago, he invited me to a spaghetti dinner held outside in the backyard of Mary's home in Greenport, which had turned into an Airbnb. And we had a wonderful time talking about Walt Whitman and exploring the house. And it was a wonderful, memorable experience for me. So I want to give a shout out to Ed. So that's all I have to present tonight. We have so many more things, but we have time constraints, and I've been on a long time. I want to thank you for joining me in this review and sampling of the recent donations to the birthplace. Thank you and have a great evening, and stay dry.
Okay, Cynthia, back to you. Unmuting, hold on.
Unmute, okay. I'm getting a message. Okay. Well, let's have a round of applause for Margaret for the beautiful presentation and all of you donors. Oh my gosh. Is this amazing? It's just amazing what we have. And our archives are open to scholars, to students, to curious visitors, of course, by appointment. But we really are able to bridge a very wide gap in a lot of the history of Walt Whitman with our collection. And we recently had a fellow who's writing a history of Walt Whitman's school teaching days and would like to come to our collection and see what we have about Walt Whitman as a school teacher. And so we couldn't do this without donors like you. And you see how even just the artifacts tonight expand the breadth and depth of what we have. And yet it's all connected because of course it's connected by Walt Whitman. But all of you from the Feinsteins, from the J. Smith and family, and as I said, I've met all of you. It's so wonderful to go back now and see these wonderful artifacts, and it brings back fond memories for me. Having met you and talked about these and brought them to the birthplace like gifts, very precious gifts that they are. So thank you very much. I'm sorry we don't have time to have all of you make a comment about your donation. If we were having this in person, and maybe we'll repeat it when we can be open again next spring or summer, you can all come, and then we can all sit and chat and share our stories and about our grandparents who had these wonderful books and did the wonderful things for Walt Whitman generations ago. And I'm sure you know your grandparents would be very pleased to see how you've handled their legacy with us here at the birthplace. So thank you so very much. I appreciate it. I want to give a shout out. I see one more board member was arrived, Bob Savino. So Bob, thank you for joining us tonight. And any of the others whom I haven't mentioned, please put a chat up in the chat group so I can see you. And you can ask Margaret questions. Isn't Margaret amazing? Margaret is just wonderful. She could be on the road show. She's so great, but I don't really tell her that. I want to keep her with us. She knows so much about everything, and believe me, she gave a very brief description of things. She could really talk, for quite a while on all the things that we have. So again, thank you to Margaret. Thank you to all of you donors. I wish we could be together. Who knows? Maybe we'll try it again. This is like our third try at doing this. We had tried to do it a few years ago, and then we tried to do it this spring in person. Then we got rained out, and now we are here. So perseverance, that's what we do. A shout out to Caitlin. Amazing how she handles all these things. Cool, calm, and collected. Thank you, Caitlin. And I don't know if we have time for one comment from one of the board members, if somebody would like to say something and close up, but I say thank you. And if there's any board member who'd like to raise their hand or say thank you, I think we can do that for a minute. And then the musicians will be back and playing. Susan.
Every time I listen to someone like Margaret, I am just in such amazement of what she brings to the birthplace. So I want to recognize her especially, as all the donors should be recognized. But I think she tonight really brought the program together and helped us to appreciate everything over and over and once again. I think we take some things for granted. I think now in the time of this pandemic and in a very strange and difficult world we're living in, when we can escape to the birthplace virtually and go back in time and, with the help of Margaret and everybody else, just to lose ourselves back in the birthplace, I feel it's kind of like being reborn. So thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Beautifully said, as always. All right, so put your questions up in the chat group. I'm sure Margaret will answer them, and she has an email we're happy to share. And as I said, hopefully maybe one day we can do this in live time and in real life, and meet person to person. So thank you again. Thank you for joining us. Caitlin, thank you. Thank you to the board members. And we will be starting a grant writing process with the new music collection. Let me say this, we need storage. And you didn't get a clear view of our classroom, but now we are coming out at the gills with these wonderful collections, and we need more room. So that will be my next grant writing endeavor, to find a nice, safe home that's temperature controlled and correct for all these wonderful artifacts. So thank you. Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you if you want to reintroduce Margaret and Tom. And I'm just going to enjoy the music, as you all should. Thank you.
All right, coming back. Thank you, Cynthia. And yes, Mother Nature allowed us to have this event.
Yeah.
We're so happy for that. We're so happy that everyone was able to connect from all different places. And I just also want to share with you, we do have events every week online with poets. I'm going to put the link in the chat just in case you want to check those out. You pre-register just like you did here tonight, to be here tonight. And we'd love to see you there as well. We have poets, we have scholars sharing with us on Zoom every single week. So without further ado though, I do want to reintroduce Tommy Santoriello and Margaret Lassen. And we're just so happy to have you both with us virtually now.
Well,
And
thank you.
again, in the chat, please share any questions or comments. All right, Margaret and Tommy, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for all the great work you do there. It's such a great place.
You can hear us, right? We're unmuted.
Yes, you sound great. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Got it together.
All right, here we go. Come a little bit closer. Hear what I have to say. Just like children sleeping, we could dream this night away. There's a full moon rising, and the moon is rising now. Wanna see it shining, see it shining in your eyes. Because I'm still in love with you. Wanna see you dance again. Still in love with you. On this harvest moon. When we were strangers, loved you from afar. When we were lovers, I loved you more. But the full moon's rising. Let's go dancing in the light. I wanna celebrate. See it shining in your eyes. Because I'm still in love with you. Wanna see you dance again. Still in love on this harvest moon. Because I'm still in love with you. Wanna see you dance again. Still in love on this harvest moon.